The myth of Jewish and black unity. An assassin's bullet ripped through the body of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968. That dreadful day will live in the memories of many truth-tellers because it marked the end of independent black leadership in the United States. Since then, the community has been without authentic leadership for over 50 years. Not one black manufactured leader has risen to power after King's death. At least, not one with the power to galvanize the masses. None of the neoliberal, hypnotized, corporate-sponsored leaders are committed to justice. King loved his people so much that he sacrificed his life for them. Washington is right when he states in A Testament of Hope, "No other black leader has quite equaled the rich social and religious artistry of Martin Luther King Jr., who was indeed a world historical figure. He captured the spotlight of history precisely at the right time and responded with a blueprint for what America could become if it trusted its democratic legacy. His dream proved to be too threatening. Leadership requires courage. Not even our best institutions can teach how to acquire this precious attribute. King was not afraid to confront the serious issues of his day. In an interview with the Jewish community just weeks before his assassination, he proved to be a man of great courage. This interview appeared in Conservative Judaism in 1968, days before King's death, and reveals his dedication and lack of fear. Under heavy scrutiny from his base and no doubt pressure to be less radical for this sensitive interview, King maintained his commitment to speak truthfully on behalf of millions whose voices were marginalized and maligned. King's conversation focused on broken ties between liberal Jews and conservative black American leaders. The late Honorable Dr. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel invited King to this discussion and opened the dialogue by comparing King to the Hebrew prophets. Where in America today do we hear a voice like the voice of the prophets of Israel? Martin Luther King was a sign that God had not forsaken the USA. God had sent him to us. His presence is the hope of America. His mission is sacred, and his leadership is of supreme importance. Martin Luther King is a voice, a vision, and a way. I call upon every Jew to hearken to his voice, share his vision, and follow his way. The whole future of America will depend upon the impact and influence of Dr. King. King responded, saying he was genuinely concerned with the religious community's lack of involvement in the government's mistreatment of African Americans. All too often, said King, the religious community has been a taillight instead of a headlight. King would address several questions raised by the rabbis who wanted to know how to repair the broken relationship between the black and Jewish communities. His opening remarks reveal that he was not timid and was willing to jeopardize offending the primary source of his financial contributions. I am not going to make a speech. We must get right to your questions. I want to say that we confront a crisis in our nation, a crisis born of many problems. We see on every hand the restlessness of the comfortable and discontent of the affluent, and somehow it seems that this mammoth ship of state is not moving toward new and more secure shores, but toward destructive rocks. King's opening response to the rabbis is relevant in the 21st century. He argued that the Jewish community's perceived problem was one of perspective. Meanwhile, one group is committed to moving toward new and more secure shores. The other refuses to accept change and steers toward destructive rocks. Interestingly, we see the same dynamic within the 2020 Democratic Party, which has controlled the fate of the black American community for 6 decades. The Democratic Party leadership refuses to accept the new reality. Instead, it has selected Joe Biden as its representative to maintain the status quo. Biden will not bring the country closer to economic equality, but will prolong the suffering of the poor. He will steer us towards the destructive rocks King warned us to avoid. Joe Biden is a regressive character. He represents the status quo and is committed to maintaining the old ways that are oppressive and anti-democratic. The selection of Biden was orchestrated by the oligarchs, who will do anything to avoid steering the ship toward more secured shores. They will go to any length to keep neoliberalism alive, albeit on its deathbed. King would argue elsewhere that voters in 1968 needed more Democratic Party candidates to select for office. I do think the voters of our nation need an alternative in the 1968 election, but I think we are in bad shape finding that alternative, with simply Johnson on the one hand and Nixon on the other. Likewise, in 2016 and 2020, the Democratic Party did not provide the voters with an alternative. Biden was placed into power by media oligarchs and functions as their puppet. Our political representatives take their orders from their financial handlers. Big-ticket holders and political investment blocs are not interested in addressing the needs of the voting class. Unfortunately, millions of Americans still believe their vote matters, against all evidence indicating that voting does not change the status of America's working poor. For example, former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg proved that the political investment theory, articulated most clearly by economist Thomas Ferguson, is in full effect. The poor and working class are no longer needed when one super-rich investor can purchase the presidential nomination without the financial support of the people. The oligarchs placed their bets on Biden, a much weaker candidate than Hillary Clinton. Biden had complete backing from the media, and his strategists controlled the major social media platforms. The oligarchs guaranteed his victory by hook or crook and were determined to place their mouthpiece in power. Biden assumed office in 2021. Now what? His many flaws and rapid cognitive decline threaten our national security. If Trump could get elected, why not place Biden in power? The bar was already lowered with Trump's election. Why not Sleepy Joe? The super-rich and neoliberal fanatics control the Democratic Party and refuse to accept the death of their failed ideology. Some dared to ask Trump if he would receive the outcome of the 2020 election. How hypocritical! Since they could not accept his win in 2016, they spent 4 years trying to remove him from power. Yet, they have the unmitigated gall to demand he quietly leave office and accept an election manipulated and controlled by media oligarchs. Neoliberalism has failed ordinary people wherever it is adopted. Several former Eastern European countries that briefly experimented with this sinister ideology have since rejected it. They were being choked to death by communism, and now neoliberalism has also betrayed them. Some former Soviet countries are slowly returning to a new form of authoritarianism, not unlike the communism they rejected. King reminded his audience that his philosophy of nonviolence was a potent weapon to fight against white supremacy. The rabbis asked him to respond to the accusation that he was a moderate. Many African Americans misunderstood him because they lacked proper knowledge of his philosophy. I think nonviolence, military, conceived, and executed, well organized, is the most potent weapon available to the black man in his struggle for freedom and human dignity, said King. The rabbis, led by Rabbi Gendler, continued to question King. He asked why he associated with civil rights organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. Weren't they in open conflict with his central ideology? King said he spoke with the leader of SNCC, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, about his misuse of the phrase Black Power. Let's not use this slogan, Black Power, said King. Let's get the power. Many ethnic groups have power, and I didn't hear them marching around talking about Irish power or Jewish power. They just went out and got the power. Let's go out and get the power. King continued to elaborate on Black Power. He reminded his audience that the phrase contained many positive attributes that should not be misconstrued. Black Power, in a positive sense, said King, is a psychological call to manhood. The black community was ashamed of themselves for so many years, and Black Power is a psychological call to manhood and black dignity. Black Power is pooling black political resources to achieve our legitimate goals. The black people of America must attain political power by pooling political resources. Revisionist historians must revise their assessment of King as moderate. His views became more aligned with black radicals, and this, more than anything, frightened white liberals. White liberals continue to fear and hate black intellectuals, especially independent thinkers and those who decide how they want to wage their struggle against white supremacists. King argued that we can use politics to access power. Suppose black people voted in unity on issues that could empower them financially. King wanted African Americans to form alliances with progressive whites and Puerto Ricans and vote as a political bloc for policies that would benefit each group equally. The Black Power slogan was problematic for King. He was a philosopher and focused more on substance than rhetoric. However, he believed that to control one's economic destiny, black power was needed to achieve legitimate power. King was transformed after the 1963 Dream Speech, and his political philosophy underwent radical changes. For instance, one must study his writings and speeches from 1965 to 1968, when his perspective on many issues dramatically changed. Some of his views became inseparable from radical Pan-Africanists. The post-Dream King became more radicalized as he embraced his life mission. His views on integration underwent a drastic change after 1965. Integration became more than petitioning the government to allow black people to use the same restrooms and water fountains as whites or attend the same public schools and universities. The new king discovered that most Southern schools remained segregated after Brown in 1954. He also realized the federal government lacked the will to force Southern whites to comply with the law. After King's views on integration became devoid of their illusory cover, he conducted a deeper analysis of the potential of black empowerment. If the schools would not fully integrate, it mattered little now because African Americans could never overcome the barbarism arrayed against them without economic power. They needed the financial wherewithal to transcend the ravages of white supremacy. The awakened king began to view integration as sharing political and economic power and not merely having access to toilets and water fountains. Segregation remained demonic, but integration was no longer considered necessary for attaining black success. Sharing economic power would never become a reality without a warlike strategy like the one for social integration. King told Rabbi Gendler that he fully supported the positive aspects of segregation. King acknowledged integration's weaknesses. Segregation positively affected the black community and gave them a semblance of independent economic empowerment. The post-Dream King accepted what the Pan-Africanists preached for decades. The heroic struggle for integration was an illusion. It would never provide African Americans with the power needed to protect themselves from the ravages of white barbarism. King probed more deeply into the demonic nature of white supremacy and underwent another fundamental change. He began to see integration as a net gain for whites and a significant loss for black people. Often, when they merge, integration, desegregation, the Negro is integrated without power. His 2 or 3 positions of power in the separate, segregated, situation passed away, so he lost his bargaining position and power. He lost his posture where he could be relatively militant and grapple with our problems. Rabbi Gendler continued to question King about the black-Jewish relationship. He wanted to know about his refusal to denounce men like Rat Brown, Jamal Abdullah Al-Amin, and Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, for being anti-Semitic. The rabbi reminded King that his financial contributions from white liberals had suffered because of his refusal to condemn certain men and organizations as anti-Semitic. "Have your contributions from Jews fallen off considerably?" asked Rabbi Gendler. "Do you feel the Jewish community is copping out of the civil rights struggle?" This question encapsulates the heart of the interview. It remains the primary problem plaguing black leadership in the 21st century. The source of funding for black politicians remains problematic. It is a question that all significant politicians should carefully study. How King responded would determine if white liberal big-ticket holders would continue to finance his movement. The rabbis wanted to know his views on those accused of being anti-Semitic. When asked if he believed specific individuals and civil rights organizations were anti-Semitic, King responded emphatically, "No, there is no anti-Semitism in the black community. The Negro confronts the Jew in the ghetto as his landlord. He confronts the Jew as the store owner around the corner, where he pays more for what he gets. The fact is that the Jewish storekeeper or landlord is not operating based on Jewish ethics. He is operating simply as a marginal businessman." Stop the press! No student of King's philosophy could dare accuse him of being too moderate when he is, in fact, one of the most courageous individuals in American history. There is not one major political leader in the United States, black or white, who dares to publicly address the killing of unarmed black Americans by white police officers. Courage distinguishes King from the black manufactured leaders appointed to position by white liberals. Such individuals claim to represent the interests of African Americans but are water carriers for white neoliberals. King continued to answer questions raised by the rabbis. He said it was a mistake for the Jewish community to believe that black Americans were anti-Semitic. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, would not tolerate anti-Semitism in any form. "We have made it clear that we cannot be the victims of the notion that you deal with one evil by substituting another. We cannot substitute one tyranny for another, and for the black man to be struggling for justice and then turn around and be anti-Semitic is not only a very irrational course, but it is a very immoral course. Whenever we have seen anti-Semitism, we have condemned it with all our might." The rabbis seemed content with King's response. They asked him about the upcoming Poor People's Campaign, a massive march on Washington for economic justice. It was scheduled for April 22, 1968, but did not happen. King died on April 4, 1968, from gun violence. The Poor People's Campaign signaled a significant shift in King's philosophy, from one focused exclusively on integration to attacking economic equality. "I think it is necessary now to deal massively and militantly with the economic problem," said King. "The grave problem facing us is the problem of economic deprivation." Dr. King died before conducting this sacred vision. The oligarchs also crushed the Occupy Wall Street protest movement in 2011. King was the most vocal in arguing for a guaranteed livable wage. He took the fight for economic justice to the nation's capital, where the game's rules are written. The post-dream speech, King addressed the gap between the dream and the realities, the gulf between promise and fulfillment. King continued to remind the rabbis that his upcoming march on Washington was necessary. History has shown that those in power rarely respond to the needs of the powerless unless forced to do so. We know from my experiences in the past that the nation does not move on questions involving genuine equality for the black man unless something is done to bring pressure on Congress and to appeal to the conscience and self-interest of the nation.